This and that and what the fuck else, episode 147. In this episode I'll be talking about some stuff from the pestilence, my favorite topic, the global revolution, quite a lot about that, some ICC things, NATO and the US, and what the fuck that will make you most probably look for the closest mooring tool. But let's start with the news. South African Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor said that the country does not intend to consider Russia an enemy on someone else's orders. Pandor noted that Russia is a friend for the Republic of South Africa. And I agree with her on that one. And there's a lot of stories on that ICC thing, and I have some articles on it, and it is my firm belief that that ICC warrant was instigated by the Americans via the British, and it was a plan to embarrass Putin and South Africa at this upcoming BRICS meeting, which is going to be huge. There's a lot of countries, new countries, that's going to join. And BRICS is suddenly a major opponent for the West, for the Western Bloc stuff, the G20, the G7, all of those. And we must expect a lot of dirty plays against members of BRICS or potential members of BRICS. Then we get to the pestilence. This is very disturbing. Death riddle. Mysterious Australians dying at levels not seen in 80 years. And the UK might be seeing the same phenomenon. Now, for various reasons, I won't expand too much on it, but we knew from the word go, the mere jab was not the main plan. Remember, the WF has made it very clear, at least 80% of the world's population must be reduced. Then we get this one. Over 138 Guatemalan doctors have died suddenly or unexpectedly after being jabbed. A courageous doctor has been tracking physician sudden deaths in Guatemala, post AstraZeneca, Pfizer and Moderna. Doctors in Paraguay are also dying suddenly. Now, right in the beginning, I made a skidmark, and I didn't make a skidmark. It was a post that the societies of the world should be extremely concerned, because what we saw then was health personnel, health workers, education professionals, and security forces were placed under tremendous pressure to take the shot. And now we see what is happening. Now, just for a moment, imagine yourself in your society with basically very few health workers, very few education people, and very few security people. That society is done and will be easy prey for the cretins from the globalists. Don't forget it. And then we get this, and I have spoken about this previously. It's now a week since the first reports came out about that Kinshal missile that was used against that command and control center close to Kiev. And there were just small notices here and there about it, and no details. And a week later, still no details. A terrifying strike of the Russian supersonic missile Dagger at a depth of 130 meters on the NATO command center in Ukraine Greek Pro-News writes about the huge losses among NATO officers as a result of the missile attack. And you can stop it if you want to read it, the whole article. Something very fishy is going on there. And then there was this article yesterday. A Greek source, the Russian hypersonic missile Kinzhal managed to hit the joint Ukrainian NATO control and command center installed at a depth of 130 meters. The underground headquarters housed NATO officials and reportedly housed over 300 people. Most of them are British and Poles, but there are also American representatives of private companies that support communications and data transmission. This is the first massive strike against the NATO personnel, and is not known how Western capitals reacted, as there has been no response. It will be the same as recognizing the active participation of personnel in the war against Russia. In the coming days, it will be seen to what extent this will affect the conduct of Ukrainian and Western operations and attempts to stop the Russian offensive on Bakhmut. Well, all I can say is that from the things that I've been reading, apparently the loss of that command and control center is already felt on the front. But the reality is, the West is not saying a word about this. And there were, as I say, 300 people in that bunker. The thing is 130 meters underground. But this missile is a monster. And there are military analysts that are of the opinion that nobody could survive. Because, first of all, the kinetic shock would be tremendous from this hypersonic missile hitting the ground. No need even to explode. And then the explosion, that shock wave would basically pulverize anything inside those bunkers. But let's see. And then we get to the EU. And this Ursula von der crazy. And she just does not have a reverse gear. Europe has successfully overcome dependence on Russian gas. Gas prices in Europe have skyrocketed. Now Europe needs to overcome its dependence on totalitarian Chinese rare earth elements, and then Europe will be completely happy. Ursula von der Leyen made an important confession. We know that we are now in an era where we rely on a single supplier, China. It accounts for 98% of our rare earth supply. And in that little fucking head, you can imagine she's dreaming of a way to occupy the regions where the rare earths are, because that is what the West has been doing for the past 80 years. But those days are over. They need to reconsider. They need to really think about their actions. The world has had enough of their colonialism and of their rampant terrorism across the globe. They are out of money. They're now out of their industries. Their economy is tanking. But still, they don't have a reverse gear. And then we get this. Child crime in Germany spikes on an appalling scale. The number of suspects under 14 leapt to over 93,000 in 2022, a 35.5% increase on the previous year. Official statistics revealed, with theft, assault, property damage and drug-related crimes being the most frequent committed. The number of overall crimes also rose, reaching 5.6 million, up by 11.5% from 2021. But officials at the Federal Criminal Police Office stressed that it's only conditionally helpful to compare the 2 years because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And he keeps his fucking trap shut about the migrant pandemic. That is not mentioned. But they are being turned into toast by their own stupidity. Then we get to the global revolution. China and Brazil agrees to stop using the US dollar as an intermediate currency for trade. One step at a time, the US dollar hegemony will end. The empire it supports will crumble. and the narrative of American exceptionalism will be shattered. China, Brazil strike a deal to ditch the dollar for trade. This has been predicted, but Joe Biden paid no attention and went bravely forward with his operation, the thing that I call his Operation Boomerang, and now they are burning. The global dollar system has received a new blow. Following Russia's transition to trading in energy resources for national currencies, now Russia sells more than half of its oil to India, China and Turkey for rubles, yuan and dirhams. Saudi Arabia, the former main US ally in the oil region of the Persian Gulf, has actively joined the process. The Saudis agreed with Kenya to sell their oil without using the dollar. Kenyan President William Ruto has signed an agreement with Saudi Arabia to buy oil in Kenyan shillings instead of dollars. We should add that Saudi Arabia is the main supplier of oil to this African country, and Kenya itself is the largest player in the global tea and coffee market after India, Brazil and China. We wonder what will happen to the dollar when several other large countries follow the path of Russia, Saudi Arabia, Kenya, India and China, which are already announcing the expansion of dollar-free international trade. The days of the dollar is done, and it had happened very fast. Last year I listened to analysts talking about it, and they predicted it will take 8 to 10 years. And here we are, merely 8 months later. It is done basically. Look at this. This is something also very important to take note of. The US is the war maker. China and Russia are the peacemakers. And these are two headlines from what is this news? Wall Street Journal. Saudi Arabia, Iran restore relations in a deal brokered by China. The court marks diplomatic victory for Beijing in a region where the US has long dominated the geopolitics. And then another one. Saudi Arabia, Syria close to resuming ties in Russia brokered talks. The emerging deal could leave the US again on the sidelines during the dramatic shift in the Middle East geopolitics. This is very important to take note of. The Middle East has had it with America. The Americans must be clever, pack their bases and soldiers and equipment up and go back home. Otherwise, you can expect a second Afghanistan. And then we have this. The old world order for crude oil is disappearing. Russian Energy Minister Nikolai Shulganov said on Tuesday that his country has now been able to redirect all of its crude oil exports that have been impacted by Western sanctions over Ukraine to what he referred to as friendly countries. I can say today that we have managed to completely redirect the entire volume of exports affected by the embargo. There was no decrease in sales. There you have it. How the fuck did the West expect Russia must respond to their sanctions? Sit in the corner and cry. Obviously it didn't happen like that. And then there's some more bad news for the West. The EAEU improved the following indicators in 2022. Now this is important, and us, we guys living here in the West and South Africa, so we never get news out of that part of the world. And now it is becoming clearer that part of the world is actually a major player. Look at this. Agricultural production up 9.4%. Grain production up 27%. Fixed capital investment 5.3%. Mutual trade 10.3%. Construction works 5%. On January 1, 2023, Russia assumed the chairmanship of the Eurasian Economic Union, an organization that united Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and other countries in 2015. Russia's chairmanship has the following priorities: developing the technological potential of the member states, boosting interaction and digital transformation, developing the agricultural sector, creating common energy markets, harmonizing the financial markets, equalizing the competitive environment for unions enterprises. In the past 8 years, the EAEU member states have done a lot to eliminate the barriers to the movement of goods, services and capital and labor between the countries of the Union. In most sectors, common markets have already been created and are operating successfully. In 2022, 3 of the 11 listed barriers were removed, and another 4 will be lifted in the near future. That is a massive trade bloc. And in the meantime, thanks to Operation Boomerang, the EU is sinking. And then we've got this from Marjorie Taylor Greene. I warned the dollar would be replaced with the one a year ago when Washington decided to wage a proxy war with Russia in Ukraine, and now it's happening. The warmongers' Ukraine war is going to plunge Americans into economic woes never seen before in our entire history if the dollar falls. They will be to blame, and America will never recover. This has to end. Unfortunately, she's a lone voice in the wilderness. But the American population need to take note. Those cretins sitting in a shithouse in Washington are planning your demise, and you are going into it with your eyes wide open. And then we get to that ICC shit. And listen to what this guy says. When a Ukrainian child brings a minimum of $100,000 income when adopted by an American couple, multiply it by 20,000 orphans brought from orphanages to Russia and understand the crying around the value of a minimum of $2 up to $5 billion of lost income for Ukraine. That is the reality. That is one of the things, driving forces behind that ICC warrant. Those orphanages and orphans were all moved into Russia where they can be safe. And this is what's happening there. And more on the ICC. The Hague Court. It is a criminal offense to take children from a war zone to a safe place. Look at the irony. Well, that's actually what they are saying. Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights Maria Belova says, Russian soldiers, not Ukraine ones, were taking the children away from the shelling, Mariupol included. Some parents were sending or driving their children to a safe place in Russia. They were staying in prophylactic centers. In children's summer camps, there was no forced relocation, no forced adoption. We handed the children over to the legal representatives if they showed up. Western officials have not paid attention to the children suffering from Ukrainian shelling over the past several years, and now they are getting concerned, which is very true. And then we get to Lukashenko. Alexander Lukashenko called the Minsk agreements a fraud on the part of Ukraine and the West. I ran like a dog from one president to another and conveyed different messages. It was very important for me to stop this war, Lukashenko said about the initial stage of the conflict in Ukraine in 2014. The time gained was used to militarize Ukraine and arm its army, as Merkel and Holland have said, the president of Belarus added. Now, this is something to take note of. That fraud that was committed around the Minsk agreements, there's no way that Putin is going to forget that. The West can forget it to try and think they will play a role in negotiating anything. And then there's this disturbing here. Europe will drown in blood if NATO intervenes in the conflict in Ukraine, writes the columnist for the Polish edition of NDP, Hanna Kramer. There is no secret that the United States will support Zelensky to the very end, because the conflict was provoked and actively financed by Washington, which wanted to isolate Europe from Russia in this way. For the sake of maintaining world domination, the White House will stop at nothing. If we don't stop the American Reich now, they will start new wars all over the world and drown Europe in the blood of its own citizens. That is something to take note of. And then we've got this something else. Just take note of it. That's a statue of Lenin that was on a trolley that traveled around the city on the tram lines. In case you haven't had your daily dose of weirdness yet, why not start with this mobile monument of Vladimir Lenin? After the death of the leader of the global proletariat, the statue was taken around Moscow by railroad. The party decided that having Lenin just stand there didn't do enough. The idea was to have the monument ride around town as well as spin on its own axis, which added flair. Lenin literally gazed over the workers who watched the mobile statue in awe as it passed by. Interesting. And then there's some little bit of science news. Giant meatball of extinct mammoth unveiled in the Netherlands. A science museum in the Netherlands is displaying a giant meatball made from meat grown with the DNA of an extinct woolly mammoth. That's quite fascinating. And then we have this. US presidents and their wars. You can stop the thing if you want to read the details of every one, but look at that list of wars under each one of those guys. The only guy with a clean slate is Donald Trump. Let that sink in. And then we have this. And this is now on that craziness of that charges that has been brought against Donald Trump. Looks like the Santos will refuse to extradite Trump from Florida. There will be incoming charges, but the indictment is sealed. Charges are unknown until he appears in court, which is expected on Tuesday next week. And then Ron DeSantos has tweeted and said, "The weaponization of the legal system to advance a political agenda turns the rule of law on its head. It's un-American. The Soros-backed Manhattan District Attorney has consistently bent the law to downgrade felonies and to excuse criminal misconduct. Yet now he's stretching the law to target a political opponent. Florida will not assist in extradition request given the questionable circumstances at issue with this Soros-backed Manhattan prosecutor and his political agenda." I see big shit coming in America. I said it previously. In my mind, America is very close to civil war. And then we have this from the WEF and this satanic maniac. A selection of speeches by Yuval Harari of the World Economic Forum about how they, his favorite phrase, have hacked humanity and will be able to internally control everyone and monitor everyone remotely. Every country will become a data colony. Humans are hackable animals, Harari believes. A reminder of what they're cooking for us, and even amuses me how these non-human WEF people keep calling us animals, and the people in the halls, for example, pretend not to notice it or not to find anything objectionable in those words. Well, the world better wake up. The WEF has got big plans for all of us. And then we get to that what the fuck moment and look at this disgusting shit. Look at this. Bondage-themed drag queen show for babies forced to cancel shows after public backlash. Public backlash, I ask you. There should have been public whippings. How is it possible that the Western world has degraded to this level? How is it possible? This cannot have a good outcome. Please give me a like and a subscribe and share the thing. And thank you for your support.